We first noticed Asher was having difficulties with learning when he was about 5. We ended up having him privately tested, and of course it came back that he was dyslexic. It was super overwhelming. Like there was just list and list of all these programs. So we started talking to people and felt like everybody was just saying something different. I hired the lady that had tested him. She tutored him for a year, one-on-one, 4 days a week. She came to me and was like, it's not working. Thankfully, she had met Dr. Conway. She just highly suggested the Morris Center. From there, my husband and I got in touch with the Morris Center, and Dr. Conway spoke with us over the phone, and you could just really tell his expertise in dyslexia.
Enroll your child or teenager at themorriscenter.com, or for virtual sessions, visit nowprograms.com.
This is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Welcome to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Your host, Felice Gerwitz, is an author, a publisher, and your radio show host. She will encourage, educate, and inspire you with answers to your most pressing questions, from homeschool, marriage, parenting, and much more. Felice loves to equip moms to live a Christian life because every moment counts. Be sure to visit her website at mediaangels.com. And here's your host, Felice Gerwitz.
Hey friends, Felice Gerwitz here. Well, do you love homeschooling? So do we. That's why we're celebrating 11 years at the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network. We're one community with many family-oriented podcasts growing together. We want to give a shout out to our birthday sponsors, CTC Math, Now Programs, Engineer Concepts for Youth, and Med Transcripts. Visit the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network.com, click the birthday banner at the top, and grab your freebies, and explore what our sponsors have to offer. Join the celebration today, and you'll be blessed. Hey friends, and welcome. My name is Felice Gerwitz, and this is an episode of Vintage Homeschool Moms. Today we are going to talk about homeschooling the next generation. This is episode 541, and I have a very special guest on the line, Cathy Duffy. Before I get her on here, I really want to introduce her, and Cathy is one of the humblest people you'd ever want to meet. So she's going to probably cringe as I talk about her. She's listening in. But Cathy is a renowned curriculum specialist and author, and she's best known as a curriculum reviewer at CathyDuffyReviews.com, where she recommends educational resources for the homeschool market. She's the author of many books, including the top pick books. The first began with 100, and we are currently at 103 top picks for homeschool curriculum. While these books are amazing, one of my favorites is really a lesser-known book that I believe is prophetic. And if Cathy was that type of person, she could say, I told you so, because this book was actually published in 1995. And the book is Government Nannies. In fact, I want to read you the subtitle of the book because it's really amazing. And the subtitle is The Cradle to Grave Agenda of Goals 2000 and Outcome-Based Education. And the foreword, which was really extensive, was written by the infamous John Gatto. And we're going to discuss this book and the state of public and even private education today with Cathy. Welcome to Vintage Homeschool Moms, Cathy.
Thank you, Felice.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, can you believe it's been that many years? And it really is a prophetic book. Before we get to the book, tell us and our audience a little bit about your family and why you even began homeschooling and what year you began, because that always dates us. And so I began in 1986, so I'll just give you that.
It'll frighten people. Yes, we started back in 1982, really the dark ages of homeschooling. And it really was ultimately a God thing for us getting into homeschooling, because I had I have 3 sons. So the 2 older ones were in school in kindergarten and 2nd grade at a private Christian school And I was pretty happy with it. I could, see my oldest one struggling with math, and, that's a whole nother story. But I made up math games and took them
I
in for the
remember.
classroom to use. We did,
Oh, I
we worked
bought your
around it.
math game, the Math
Yeah,
Mouse game.
yeah.
Yeah.
That all grew out of his need to
Yeah. Oh,
have,
wonderful.
hands-on learning.
Yeah.
Um, but I wasn't thinking about, switching to anything else. But God was just putting the idea of homeschooling in front of me in the weirdest ways. And well, there's a whole story. I probably don't want to waste time on it about how it
That's
was
fine.
so out of the box,
Right.
you've got to think about this. And finally I said, okay, we'll give it a try for a year. And I only knew one other family in the county who'd been homeschooling at that point,
Wow.
and they had teenagers. So there really wasn't a model to follow. So we, got into it, and I had in my mind at that time, and did for at least the first year, we'll homeschool 1 year, and then we'll put them back in school for a year for them to fix up whatever I messed up. And then we'll homeschool them another year, and we could do 1 year in, 1 year out.
Oh,
And it
wow.
sounds absolutely crazy now,
Yes.
but sounded logical to me at the time, So people who are very hesitant about their commitment to homeschooling, I totally get it. I was there, I know. But it worked out so well. And I learned so much about my children and what worked for them and worked for our family. It was a much healthier lifestyle for our family. So, once we got towards the end of the year, it's like, there's no going back. This is great.
Yeah.
But it was a more difficult time to homeschool. We didn't have publishers willing to sell to us, so we had to really scrounge and make up curriculum. And that's what got me into reviewing, because I was on a search for
good
resources
books.
to use. And there just wasn't much that was available to us. We used a lot of old books, things we scrounged, old public school books. Didn't end up using a lot of those. Made
Right.
up a lot of things.
We used them as resources. That's why I always said I was curriculum impaired, because I never used a curriculum the way it was designed.
No, never.
You take, this chapter looks good, chapter 4 in the book, and then that's it, So and that's my story too, is how I started with the unit studies, because I heard all the stuff about creation science, and I bought all these books, and I said, okay, now what do I do with them? There's too many and they're too disjointed. And so then I thought, well, I'll just write a study guide to go with it. And God introduced me to a lady who happened to have studied creation for 10 years, first as an atheist, then she became agnostic, and then she became a Christian. So she was, and also was an oil and well geologist, and that was Jill Whitlock. And so it was amazing how that began. And I had already written like the teaching part of it. So she went back and wrote a lot of the guide that we used. And we had to do that back then. And truthfully, Cathy, it's like, back in the old days. But I really believe that way of homeschooling was really beneficial to our children. I know people talk about using real books, and I loved designing certain parts of our curriculum. And I really encourage families, if they're doing a literature class, you don't necessarily have to read the literature books that are, what are recommended. You look at some of those titles and you'll be appalled. And then you can insert really good, Christian literature for that. So we did a little bit of both. I will say, I don't know if your boys were like this, but when my girls got into college, because I had the 2 girls went to college, my 2 oldest boys didn't, my daughter did, and then my 2 youngest went to college. But their biggest complaint about homeschooling was they didn't know like the latest songs, or some of them weren't that great anyway. My younger kids like country music, which I didn't like, but they listened to Christian music is what they heard in our home, and also movies. They didn't know some of the cult favorites. And I said, well, now that you're, adult children, if you really want to see some of those movies, you can. And then they would say, yeah, way overrated.
Yes.
How could you not have seen, and they're just like, we were homeschooled. But now the new generation, which is, what our audience is. They're the new generation of homeschoolers, and homeschooling has been vetted. It is now legal in all 50 states. My previous podcast about why homeschooling works has links to HSLDA that has that interactive map, which is great. And you can click on your state and find out what the laws are. And that's all wonderful. But I think one of the things that has been coming across my scrolling and reading news. So I pretty much read what I consume at this point. I don't really watch or listen to a lot of the noise out there, a little bit here and there, but I'm big on podcasts. Goes no surprise. Some YouTube. Best money I ever spent was getting rid of the commercials. So that has been wonderful. But what I found was all of these educational articles coming in front of me. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is going on and this is going on. And because we're sometimes in a bubble world, our kids are grown up now. My grandchildren are being homeschooled, so that's wonderful. But we're still in a world that it doesn't interact on a daily basis, let's say, with, public school kids and Christian school kids, or, now there's vouchers and there's a lot of other stuff. And I just was appalled because I've never been one who said everyone has to homeschool. Some of our peers in the homeschool world would get up there and say, and almost in some ways shame people. If you're a Christian, you can't put your kids in school. And I never was that person. But now in my older age, I'm really saying, all right, people, you really need to consider very, very, very strongly the importance of homeschooling because of what has happened. Because you need a strong, my kids went to secular university, and you have to have strong kids who really understand their values, their faith, and make it their own to be able to go out there. And I can tell you story after story, which we don't have time for, about, Christina, my second oldest, who very successfully debated the professor on the fallacies of carbon-14 dating. She knew her stuff. And this one kid goes, oh my gosh, I would have had to bring in my mom to tell you that. Another daughter debating a professor about the value of having a pro-life stance. She actually went to the professor afterwards and said, I just want to know, is this going to affect my grade? I said, you didn't say that. And she goes, yes, Mom, I did, because she was, had a 4.0 so far in college, and she did. And the professor said, well, let's see what you're made of. And she kept, throwing things at her.
Proved herself. Yeah.
But she loved history. It was a history class. I don't even know why we're getting into that, in history. But of course, she ended up with an A in that class, but asked to transfer out of that school because it was just too much. So, it's if your kids aren't strong, they're going to be, texting you or coming home and saying, oh, by the way, I no longer have any faith, or, and that's happened more and more. And I'm sure,
Yeah. Well, that's it. I think we forget education is really the linchpin of culture, because we form our children and we know that their fundamental beliefs are often shaped before they hit junior high, certainly before high school. And if they've been indoctrinated into, particular ideas, it's really hard to shake them out of it. If you just can't spend that many years in that system and not be changed. And I wasn't aware of this when we started homeschooling. I don't think a lot of us were. It was something that came to me gradually, as I just began to understand, as I was making choices about what to do with homeschooling, what values mattered to me, what did I think was important to teach my children. So it was kind of going back to square one, because we had to make it up ourselves.
Right.
And I think a lot of us did that same thing and got very convinced about the whole thing. And I didn't ignore, and that's why I got into writing that Government Nannies book, because I was still concerned about the state of education elsewhere, because it matters for everybody.
Right.
I was involved with the Alliance for the Separation of School and State, which sounds, really quite radical, but
It does.
really, because I believe in educational freedom, that we need to be free to teach our children the truth. And part of this goes back to the early battles for the freedom to home educate, because it has to do with being free from government control, government dictating, you have to teach this in your history, you have to teach that, you can't use this, that sort of thing that goes on in the public schools as a matter of course.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we've seen that increase. And so this is back in 1995 when I wrote that book. And I was working with gals from Concerned Women for America and others, others who were battling the school wars.
Right.
And it didn't take long before I realized they were just battling over who gets to control the lever. Well, that's a waste, because that's an eternal battle, Yeah, you win this year, so you can get creation in or out or whatever it was at the time of one school or school district. It had nothing to do with the big picture of what was going on, the control over schools. And it's not right for any one group to be dictating to all other groups what our children should learn.
And that's the thing I noticed.
That's the radical part of my thinking. We just.
But then what I noticed was that in your book, you talk about the needs of a few are what caused these laws to be made, but then it's mandated for everyone. Right. And there's a really telling part in your book at the beginning where you talk about, now it looks like peanuts, appropriation of however many billion, but back then, but how the kids were taken out of one school, put in another, because if they had 50% or more of a certain demographic of people, they would get, whatever it was, $20 at the time. And it turned out to be $1.6 million for the county. And I do have a story, though. I'm going to date myself. In 1979, I was teaching. And 78, I graduated and taught in a beautiful, public school in Winter Haven, where I had been junior high and high school years. Knew 8 of my teachers, walked in, they were there waiting for me, applauding, one of our own's coming back and teaching. And I had specific learning disabilities. I had amazing resources. I had, it was a resource for the children. And we actually worked at staffing them out. Novel idea, right? And so then I get married, moved to Fort Myers. We have a department of special ed. There's 8 of us in this department. And it's no longer a resource. It's self-contained, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And you no longer have all of the, and I asked the questions, I asked these questions and got in big trouble. Number one, how much is appropriated for each of my kids? At the time, I think I was making a whopping 13 or 14,000 a year. Okay. This big bucks we're talking about as a teacher. And the kids were getting something like 10 grand per child. Well, I had 2 that needed to be staffed out. I looked at their IEPs. They were very high functioning. After some remediation, and I got in big trouble. The parents were delighted. It turned out that one of these little boys at the time, he's a grown man now, his sister went to high school with my husband. I didn't know that at the time, but I met them at my husband's class reunion, and she was telling me how the whole family was so delighted that he was now out of this program because now he was really learning, and thank you so much. But I got a call from, I got called into the principal's office, and I was told, do you know that we're keeping a folder on you? And I was a very smart aleck person. I have not really changed. I go, oh, that's really cool. So that means I can keep a folder on you too? And all the things I see happening in the school. And so I did get threatened, but that doesn't work, and I mean, I come from an Italian family. Guilt has been ingrained in us. We're immune to guilt. Okay. So I ended up calling.
But you're costing them money, right? It's by getting a student out of the program. You're costing them money. Yes.
I didn't know that that they were just losing 20 grand because I had staffed. I mean, I had everybody in the meeting. I knew what to do, but
Yeah.
the principal and assistant principal weren't part of the process. And I didn't think I didn't know that they needed to be, and they didn't. So anyway, the end of the story is that I decided when I got pregnant that I needed to retire from school, at least for a while, and had planned to put my children back into school. But I was just floored that money was such an issue, and I am very naive. So, I usually try to see the good in things. But so, I mean, if that was happening back in 79, back in,
Yeah.
you talk about dark ages, what's happening today? And so, your book was really eye-opening. It's still available on Amazon, and it's not currently of course under print.
No.
You probably you're not getting the money on it. Somebody's selling their old copy. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had bought so many of those and gave them away to all of my friends when I first began, really being aware of the politics going on within the homeschooling. And I think the overview of this book, why don't you give us that? Can you give us a synopsis of a book you wrote almost 30 years ago?
Whoa. I don't know. I
Well,
tried to go through different
Yeah.
aspects of things related to the education being the main component, but the way they used, at-risk families, ways to invade the family and to get, insert government control into your life, to connect social workers to the family. And, then we were talking about the occasional instance where they did intervene, take children away from families, and it was happening then. But now, I mean, there's another one that's just gone crazy with the transgender thing where parents have really lost rights. I'm in California, so we're probably worse than
I
a
think
lot
you
of other
have,
states.
don't you have an amendment? Yeah, a bunch of
I don't know,
them.
but they've already got laws on the books
Okay.
that parents can't protest. You can't. And they don't have to tell parents. They can do all kinds of things with your kids. And the, health and different areas where they're, just trying to get into the family. And so I did research a lot for this book. It was very, very heavily footnoted and documented because I knew I was getting into tender territory. And I was surprised the number of legislators who were reading it. I remember getting a call late at night from one of our California key legislators who wanted to talk about it. And I've had a group fly me to Tennessee to do one end of the state, we started maybe in Memphis, went to Nashville, and then to Knoxville down the other end, doing, meeting with different legislators and groups. It was an eye opener for me that people really wanted to understand what was going on, because I felt like a voice crying in the desert, that type of thing where, and so it was good. People were listening, but again, not, we've only gone further down the rabbit hole now.
Yeah. And I think part of it is the whole idea of parental sovereignty. And that's basically, if I had to put it in a nutshell, that's what I would say this book was a warning about. And that's how I took it, that look at what will happen if we give up our rights to parent.
Right, exactly.
And I went to the county commissioners meeting. I usually stay away from them because we have the abortion amendment, which is very radical on the books. And what I really addressed was the parental control issue, where you are notified as a parent, but you don't have to give permission. And I made the point that that's the beginning, and so it's, they're trying to California eyes Florida, and so we just really pray. And I think as parents, we need to start standing up, because look at what happened in Virginia, in Loudoun County, where my sister-in-law lives. And, she has known about this for forever, but they finally stood up, and parents are standing up and making their collective voices heard, because that's what it's going to take. And so, through the years, this warning has morphed into areas, that we never would have even considered. And, as a parent, within the school system, it's really difficult to make your voices heard. It's also difficult in private schools, I'm going to say.
Yes, true.
I know when I taught, you would send kids to the office, and it doesn't necessarily mean that anything's going to happen. So you have to come up with your own incentives. But I think what turned the curtain back for a lot of parents was COVID-19.
That's what I was thinking, because it was an eye-opener for a lot of people who did not realize how bad things were. And then, having to have your kids at home, and the distance learning, and how little learning actually happened. And it was so destructive in so many ways, but the positive out of the whole thing was the wake-up call.
Right.
That a lot of parents started homeschooling, started taking an interest in what was going on with their children's education to make sure that they learned something. That's something to be grateful for. So, silver lining.
Right.
But, are they hanging on to it?
Yeah.
It helped on that end, but at the same time, we've come so far from the beginning of the homeschool movement, when people were going to jail for the freedom to homeschool,
right?
Because we did not have laws that made it legal in all the states. We are in California, it was a gray area of the law and very iffy. My eldest son worried because his friend down the street told him the police were going to put him in jail for homeschooling. I didn't know about this till after the year or two after the fact.
Oh, funny.
He was so worried about it. But that was the reality then. And people fought really hard and sacrificed for the freedom to homeschool, to control their children's education. And we've come so far now where homeschooling is a mainstream choice. And people just think of it as another item in the grocery market, that you can just choose or not, and do not understand the freedom aspect, the ability to control what their children learn. And so I've watched here in California, and I know Florida, you've got your issues too with this, where the government has come in with programs to lure children back into the systems that they control.
Right.
Through charter schools, vouchers, all the different programs that, different states have tried.
Right.
And parents are lured by the freebies, how much money they give you. And what I find for so many of those families who are in those programs is they're doing classes that, that the state pays for. But so often the thing that draws them, it's not the math class usually. It's we get free karate classes and free music lessons or free dance lessons, or one of those peripheral items rather than the main academic coverage. I'm not impressed with what I see coming out of the charter schools for homeschoolers academically. Right. I see people running around like crazy trying to get their kids here, there, and there. They're driving around a lot. And I don't know, it's a value system that I don't understand. That yes, they've got more control in some ways in making choices, but they're choosing from the government's smorgasbord of what they can use. So no Christian curriculum, no Christian resources for those Christian families. That should matter, but apparently not as much as the money.
And when we first started too, years after we started, I started because my struggling learner needed my help. I had the degree for it. But it soon morphed, I think, after that first year. And I thought, okay, we've got this. Oh my gosh, look at all, he used to write, it took half a page to write one letter, and now he's writing sentences, it's, amazing what you can do one-to-one learning,
Yes.
But I fought it. So I was like you, Cathy, my husband said, well, try it for just a year and see what happens. And we also didn't look back. 32 years was what I clocked in. Wow. And I'm only 33 now. But so we look at this now, and we look at what's happening today. And my concern is that at some point, homeschool freedoms are going to be taken away again, because you have all these choices and you could do charter and you can use your voucher money. You can here in Florida for a private Christian school that can be used. You can use it
Wow.
for a private, the
But
money.
what it will do to the private Christian school, and this is what people don't think about, because I see this lobbying from the private schools, religious schools, that they want the students. I ran a private scholarship fund for a year, and so I saw it big time too.
Okay.
Anyway, so the schools end up having to give up some of their religious character
Okay.
when they get to, and it
I was
doesn't happen
wondering.
always right up front, but they usually have to be religion neutral on their entry, the applicants who they accept. So you cannot screen for, hey, we're a Catholic school, we want Catholic students rather than non-Catholics.
Mhm.
They have to take okay, so you water down your student body to where you have Catholic schools already have a lot of non-Catholics because
Right.
people want an academic education, the discipline, whatever it is at the Catholic school. And so you already have that percentage, but you start upping that percentage even more. And then it becomes impossible to really concentrate on the Catholic aspect of instruction because you don't have that shared culture or belief system.
Well, you also are going to offend.
You're going to offend parents. It just becomes,
right.
Yeah, you're not going to do daily mass. You're not going to do a lot of the other things that a Catholic school would be doing.
Right. And
so it does destroy those private schools eventually. They become more and more like the public schools that they're meant to substitute for. They're supposed to be something better, but you end up bringing them down to the level of the other schools.
And that can be detrimental. That's not what the parents have signed up for or spending the big money for.
Yeah. And it doesn't happen the first year. It takes a while for the degradation to happen, but it does.
Yeah. And I think, the schools are going to say, well, we need the money to be able to hire good teachers. But on the other hand, unfortunately, it turns into that aspect of it. And I know for us, we could homeschool at a fraction of the cost of what they're paying now. I mean, you would get a math book and then it was a textbook and you could use it. You'd have to maybe buy another workbook or whatever the accompanying manual was. Video classes back in the day. I mean, now there's a lot of streaming, and it's, year to year, but we would just pass that down. And so all the kids did whatever the math was, it just is so much more cost effective.
Well, and even more so now, because I don't think most homeschoolers know the resources that are out there. We have a huge wealth of resources, but a lot of free things. It's just amazing what you can get.
You have that on your website. Yes,
it is there. I've got a tab up on the top of the website where it says sort by, and it sorts by publishers, authors, and free curriculum. You just click on free curriculum. There's a long list.
There is.
Of resources
I looked at them.
Free. Yeah.
I'll have the link in the show notes, and I don't think I even told you where to find them today. If you're on your cell phone, you're seeing the show notes come through with it. So look for, just go to vintagehomeschoolmoms.com, Homeschooling the Next Generation, episode 541, and then I'll have the link there. Or go to CathyDuffyReviews.com, and at the top of the bar, I believe it was under curriculum. There's
it's
not
just one of the 5 top bars up there.
Yeah.
Sort by, and click on
you'll
that.
Find it. Yeah, it's a huge list.
Yeah.
That's wonderful that you've compiled that, Cathy. That's
great.
And
those are all the things I've reviewed. And then one of the links in there is free homeschool. There's a website that lists free homeschool curriculum. You can go there and get a whole lot more. So
yeah, and the thing too is, as a parent, you need to vet. You need to look through, because sometimes things come in that may not align. And I think for us, we didn't have a choice. It wasn't like, okay, well, we have, 30 different books we can choose from, but you can find everything at curriculum fairs. And I think if you ever have the opportunity, go. There's a lot of virtual things. I hosted virtual conferences, but there really is nothing like going in person and checking them out. There are podcasts out there. Vintage is one of them, and there are many, many other ones. And we have so many great resources on our website at the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network. So check out Making Biblical Family Life Practical, as well as Melanie Wilson's podcast. And so lots of those of us who have been boots on the ground for many years and have been homeschooling and it's just free. It's free advice. And you can also search for like teaching science or teaching history and find lots of podcasts on the topic. So while parents have the resources, Cathy, what would you ask that they look for? I mean, obviously they can come to your website and search for some of the books that have made it into, I don't even think I said that my books made it to the 100 and 101 topics. So,
I have trouble even with it, trying to sort down to the, like the 100 best things. The number of resources out there is so huge, and there's so many great resources that each year something has to get bumped to make way for something else, that's come along that's really great. So, that's just the way it happens. But that's why, the website, I was just doing books for the longest time, but it was back in the 90s I started getting into computerizing things, and then, starting with a website. But that's grown over the years. So now I've got thousands of reviews. But my idea with the whole thing was to make it easier for parents to find what would work. And I tried in the books to lay out a way to select curriculum by setting your own goals, deciding what approach works for you, figuring out your children's learning styles, the things you need to think about before you start looking at the actual curriculum. Because if you know what you want to teach, what your goals are, what approach you want to use, and what type of materials are going to work best with your children, you've eliminated a lot of what's out there, and you're narrowing down your search. And so now, just over the last few years, we put a lot of that online. So I've got a learning style assessment on there that you can take.
Wonderful.
And all of this is free. We do have a thing where you can create an account, and the only purpose of that is for you to save your results from the learning style assessment or from your other searches. We do not use it for anything. We don't, just don't look at it. So you can go in there and use, there's just a basic search tool like you find on any website, but there's also an advanced search tool. And you can filter by all kinds of things, grade level, subject, details of the subject, religious viewpoint, format, all different kinds of things. And you can attach the learning style results to it, or you can go in, if you haven't done the learning style assessment, you can choose learning style aspects that matter to you. Do you have an auditory learner, or, hands-on, you want games as part of it, whatever. So you can filter through and come up with recommendations that are likely to work for your child. So it does, automates that process and then searches through all of my reviews rather than just the top picks. So the website, to me, I think a lot of people, they miss that advanced search tool.
I did see it on there. I'm glad you mentioned it.
It's really great.
No, it is really good, and I love it. And I think the person who wrote Government Nannies, would not. I thought it was so funny you're saying, and we're not going to use this information. So I trust you, Cathy.
That's really important.
Yes, it is important.
Yeah, we just don't. We do have a mailing list for my e-newsletter and things, but that's, permission on, you sign up for it, and we don't automatically put anybody on anything.
No, it's great. And before we went live, we were talking about how we're still on this block. We're still both, going 100 miles an hour. And I thought it was great that you shared that, that retirement is really not biblical. So I'll just keep
No, but, because what we're doing is useful, meaningful, purposeful, helping other people. I get to teach a history class to my 13-year-old granddaughter and another young man this year, so, getting to do that and other things, just being able to use, so much of what we've learned over the years. It doesn't get any better than that. It's
I know.
good. And I don't have to do that all the time.
I do roll my eyes when I say my podcast number, because like when I got to 100, I was thinking, oh my gosh. And now when I got to 500, I'm saying, who the heck has that much to say? I used to say, okay, I kind of pray about it and think about a theme for the month and kind of run with that. Right now we're on the homeschooling theme, even though we're in November soon. And I have one more interview I'm gearing up for, but and then I would look it up and say, well, I had to have done a podcast on this topic. And I would look and I didn't. So I said, oh, good. I have a spreadsheet now where I can quickly go through and find if I did or not. Don't want to be repetitive. But even so, I think we've learned so much from our journey.
Right.
I work with.
And that's something that I think parents miss. When they think about homeschooling or they're at the early stages of it, they worry about their ability to do, to teach algebra or, different things. Mm-hmm. And there's so much help out there. But we learn as we go. You just can't help but accumulate knowledge and ability as a homeschooling parent. If you're involved, if you're just driving, if you're just a chauffeur, different story.
Yeah.
But if you're involved with your kids,
mm-hmm.
it's amazing the education we get out of the process.
Right.
So that's just fun too.
I just see so many perks. It wasn't always easy. I was sometimes a threatening, repeating parent, say it like, I'm going to count down again. But one of the things I used to threaten was, do you know that bus that goes by? You're going to be on it next week if you don't start doing better. Oh, no, Mom, we'll do good. We'll do good. They didn't want to go to school because
we had that experience too.
But they just my kids enjoyed their free time and talked about this a lot, was giving kids time to think. And I think that is so important in our space, that we sometimes have so much we want the kids to accomplish. And then you ask them, what are some things you're interested in? One of the things my daughter is doing with her kids is they have to come up with a profession that is not college, like learn to be a plumber or learn to be an electrician, or like my one grandson, I love it. He's doing car washing and detailing. So our cars have never looked this good, let me tell you. And so, I think that's wonderful, because how many young men can't fix anything, And so, my husband's really good at carpentry, but if the plumber down the street said, please do not let him touch anything plumbing related. He's actually better at it now because we have YouTube and you can learn anything. So I think there's no excuse for the learning part of it, but you have to bring your morals and your faith to your homeschooling. And how important is that, Cathy? Did you find that with your family?
That was a major aspect of it for us. Faith was important to us even when we put our children in a Christian school before we started homeschooling. So that was a driving factor. But as our kids were getting older, I started teaching worldview, and that became
we did it too.
Just a huge part of it. So for high school, I created my own program, and it was all worldview based around history. We used, textbook is the core, and then I jump off from the historical timeline, teaching economics, philosophy, religions, government, all these literature, all the different subjects, art, in relation to the historical periods. So we did do some more concentrated things with science, but that was the timeline for everything, worldview based. And that's sort of, I've done some of that with my granddaughter, hope to do more as we go along.
See, that would be a wonderful curriculum that you didn't write, did you?
I've actually created a student workbook for what I'm doing right now this year, because
wonderful.
I'm so excited about doing it. And, we are using a textbook that's accessible, and then, working from that. But I'm not doing the whole expansion, because I've only got 2 hours one day a week with these kids. So
it's wonderful.
Anyways, it's a little bit limited. We're, history, art, and then I'm throwing in a lot of the worldview stuff as we go through. using lots of videos to supplement and discussion, and anyways, having fun with it.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I am so thrilled to be able to get this opportunity to talk to you again. We have other podcasts that we've done. I did not look them up beforehand, but I'll put the links in here from our younger years. I know, I think we did talk about learning styles. I think that was definitely one of them. Yeah. And then final words. What would you like to leave these new homeschoolers or new generation of homeschoolers with? Any final thoughts?
Yes, I think it's so important that you know what your goals are, what matters to you most, and you prioritize when you're choosing what programs to put your kids in, what classes to do, what subjects to teach. That you can't do it all, and so to choose to make sure that the most important things are in there, and that your children are learning, values, beliefs, worldview, if that's important to you. I hope it is. So that, they're not wasting time doing things because you worry about what everybody else is doing, but you're concentrating on what's important to you.
I think that's great advice. And I say amen to that. I just, I applaud these parents, but I could not do it. I cannot drive all these different places. I was not one of those moms that was the happy camper, just even taking the kids to sports. I was really happy my husband was the one doing that. But you're right. I think it's gone to the other extreme. And I think if you understand and look down the road, what do you want your children to remember? My Italian uncle used to come to the house, and he would always say to me, every time he'd come in, he'd say the same thing, hello, give me a kiss and a hug, and say, you're making memories. Remember that you're making memories. And I always remembered that that's what we're doing with our children and our lives is, you hear all these things like you did with your son about what the neighbor was saying, down the road. You keep finding and learning all these things as your children get older. They finally are sharing with me, like, Mom, did you know that Mike would jump off the watershed in the back? I'm like,
glad I didn't know it back then.
Right. And he's like, well, I landed really well. I didn't know it at the time. So it's always fun to hear those kinds of things, but it's so wonderful. And we applaud the new homeschoolers and those who have been homeschooling for a while, and just keep doing what you're doing. And, another one of my, the worst day of homeschooling is better than the best day at public school or private school, because no one cares like you do. So, well, Cathy, thank you. Go to Cathy.
Thank you, Felice.
CathyDuffyReviews.com and check out her curriculum and all the free stuff that's there now that I didn't know you had. So take care. All right, everyone. Take care. God bless, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Visit Felice at MediaAngels.com and TheVintageHomeschoolMoms.com. Vintage Homeschool Moms is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network.